Welcome to another episode of Chat's Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by Chax Training and Consulting. If you'd like your company announced during our podcast introduction, consider sponsoring our podcast transcript. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor, as well as Director of Training Solutions and Principal at Chax Training and Consulting. And listen, guys, this week I am actually out in California at the LinkedIn Learning headquarters recording an accessibility course update. I'm not sure if you're aware, but I have created several accessibility courses on LinkedIn Learning that are currently available. I'm currently in California recording an update to one of my courses. And if you're interested in learning about accessibility and you're trying to find more information, I highly encourage you to check out LinkedIn Learning. It's affordable, it's robust, and there's a lot of great information that can be found on there. So be sure to check out my courses. I have Creating Accessible PDFs, and then I have another course called Advanced Accessible PDFs. So check them out, and I hope you enjoy them. So I am going to pass you on to Dax, who is going to be running the podcast on his own today, and hopefully I will be returning shortly to join him again for our next podcast.
I know Chad's not here today, but we miss him. He is here in spirit. I'm looking forward to his new LinkedIn Learning classes. He's down there, as we heard, getting all that squared away. So I am running the show. I can do whatever I want, which is great. But that means that I need somebody else to hold the reins. So today we have a couple of special guests. We have Christine Foushi, who is the Digital Operations Manager for Content Industries, and John Foliot, who is the Chief Accessibility Officer at Content Industries. And they're here today to talk to us about Epub. Welcome to the program, guys.
Hey, Dax, thanks. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Christine?
Thanks, Dax. Good to see you again. Sorry that we are missing Chad today.
Yeah, it's okay. We tend to do that. We get really busy sometimes, and I think this is actually the first podcast we've had with where we're not doing it together, which is an interesting thing. But we kind of slowed down at the end of last year and really want to make sure that we stick with trying to get these podcasts out, because we know our audience, as soon as we don't put one up, we get emails from people saying, hey, where are you guys? Are you guys coming back? So thank you guys for joining us. Now, a lot of our audience are very familiar with PDF accessibility. In fact, our PDF accessibility Facebook group, we now have almost 3,200 members, which is amazing. And from time to time, we get questions about Epub. And Chad knows some about Epub. I don't know how much he knows, but I know that he's created some Epubs. But typically we kind of punt when we get those Epub questions. So you and I, we were all talking a little bit before we started the show about the new upcoming update from Epub 2 to Epub 3. I didn't even know that there was an update. So maybe you want to talk to our listeners about the Epub standard and kind of where we are there.
Sure. I mean, I can speak to, I am part of that PDF accessibility Facebook group, so I appreciate, I do scroll through it and read when everybody has questions. So Content Industries has been making EPUBs really for 20 plus years. We just rebranded ourselves, but we have a lot of experience over the years of being able to transform any content into an EPUB, from understand EPUBs, XML, content transformations, publishers workflows. And so now, the standard is EPUB 3, but there are a lot of EPUB 2 still out there that haven't been converted and will need to be, as outlined in, I believe, the European Accessibility Act, and eventually potentially to the US. So I will send it to John for more of the technical aspect and the benefits of the EPUBs being being
So,
passed in.
John, can you tell us a bit about the difference between EPUB 2 and EPUB 3, kind of that translation and what's kind of changed maybe between the two?
Yeah, so basically EPUB 2 was the standard that was created by the IDPF, the Independent Digital Publishing Foundation, I believe is the F. But anyway, and it was kind of an emergent standard. But about, I want to say 3, maybe 4 years ago, IDPF actually became part of the W3C, and they moved all of their standard works into the W3C. So starting with EPUB 3, it became a W3C publication. We're currently at version 3.2, with version 3.3 going into what's called candidate recommendations. So we expect to see the 3.3 standard become the normative standard. Dax, it's standards work is kind of weird. It's hard to put timelines on it, but my guess is probably within the next 6 months or so, certainly before the end of this calendar year, we will see the EPUB 3.3 standard being kind of the de facto standard. And as Christine noted, the European Union in particular are really driving towards that. There's a lot of differences, but the most important one, or at least the most important kind of points to be aware of, is that the EPUB 3 standard is using XHTML based on HTML5.
Okay.
So a lot of people were not aware that HTML5 had actually been also extended to a polyglot version, or what they call XHTML. But that's the basic format. And so with that, we get things like landmark regions and all of the advancements that came with HTML5, a lot of the stuff that we see in WCAG 2.1. So that's one of the major differences. The other is that they're really working on, and this work is still happening, but it's fairly mature already. The most important concept to be aware of in EPUB is the extensive use of metadata.
Okay.
The EPUB format is different from other document formats in that it's actually a collection of XHTML pages. Right. There are standalone pages. The EPUB file extension is essentially, I mean, anybody could make an EPUB file. There's a number of steps, but ultimately what happens is you take all of the piece parts, you put it into a zip file, and you can change the file from .zip to .epub, and you've got an EPUB book. So actually, I don't know, maybe our listeners don't know, but if you can do the exact same thing to a Word doc. So a Word doc is just a zip file. And if you ever need to extract 100 images out of a Word doc file, instead of going into each one and doing file, save as, you can take your Word doc and change the extension to .zip, then extract it, and you'll find a links folder or assets folder, I think is what it is. And inside the assets folder will be every placed image. It's a great way to be able to just suck out all the images in a document. And I've actually did a little trickery to swap out those images. I had a long report that was in Spanish and in English, and all of the charts and graphs had been reset in Spanish. So instead of going in and copy pasting or, resetting each one inside the Word doc, I just made sure those names matched and the file names matched, and just swapped out the assets folder and was able to literally make 100 image changes in it probably took me 5 minutes in total to do it. So yeah. So for our listeners, zip file, we don't always see what the zip file really is, but Word docs, and now we know that an EPUB is a zip file as well. That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, essentially what we have is a collection of marked up documents with, as you said, additional assets. And then there's the wrapper file, right? And so EPUB is essentially a wrapper file. So inside the wrapper file, there is... I don't want to get too technical. If people are interested, they can certainly reach out to us, and I can be more specific. But there's essentially a manifest file, right? Mm-hmm. That says, here's what's in the book, and that's where all of the metadata is located as well. So that is probably the biggest kind of fundamental points to be aware of, right? XHTML5, so the robustness of HTML5 but XHTML, so draconian error failure. You got to make sure all your closing tags are there, right? Your code needs to basically be 100% conformant, right? So there's that, and then there's this manifest file with the metadata, and the metadata is based on entries that you would find at schema.org. So again, there's been a lot of standardizations that's sort of happening. A lot of it's under the covers, for consumers of EPUB books. They don't really see it because EPUB readers will read both version 2 or EPUB 2 files as well as EPUB 3 files. But when you really start to sort of peel back the layers and open up or explode the zip file, that's where you start to see lots of really big differences.
The IPTC just announced that the end of last year that they have updated 2 new metadata fields inside the image properties for alt text accessibility and expanded description accessibility. Are those being are you able to target those metadata fields for images inside an EPUB?
Currently today, I'm not aware of that. I guess at some point you could. The metadata that's included talks at the book level as opposed to individual asset level.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And so, but you're talking basically about accessibility data embedded directly in the .jpeg file or .png file or what have you.
Right.
Whereas the accessibility metadata for EPUBs is at a higher order. Right. So, for example, there's a metadata declaration that essentially says that all the images have text alternatives. Right. I mean, you can explicitly make a declaration. It's called access mode sufficient. And it lists out, basically the types of accessibility support you can find within the book. Right. And so if images aren't tagged with alt text, then you can't say that access mode sufficient is sufficient for non-sighted users. Right. So it's declaratory. It's non-judgmental. It's simply declaratory that you can say this is what is going on with the book.
How would an external user then take advantage of that if they opened an EPUB and they were using a reader of some sort, and then the reader would look at that metadata and then give them some kind of a validation warning or saying, hey, this document conforms to accessibility or claims to conform to accessibility? Is that how that kind of works?
Actually, a really good question, and not exactly. The metadata at this point is primarily intended to be consumed by, I'll say, content management systems, library interfaces, right? So, there are a number of different sort of user interfaces where you can go and select your books, right? And so Vital Source is one that's very well known, and especially in educational circles, you'll see Vital Source show up. And so when you go to that website and you see all the books, when you look at the book, before you actually grab the book and download it and load it into your e-reader or what have you, right? You get that summary, and that's where the metadata is being exposed, right?
Okay.
So before, it's basically, it's kind of like, when you walk into a car dealership and there's that piece of paper stuck behind the window that tells you miles per gallon. It's kind of like that, right? They give you the information before you actually grab the book and consume it. It's a summary of the accessibility of that book. So if there's 2 versions of the same book and one is more accessible than the other, or one supports large print versus the other, then you can make an informed decision at that point.
There's actually someone we know who is working on an initiative to, the Energy Star ratings we have for appliances. He's working on getting an accessibility rating as part of that Energy Star kind of overview, kind of that, car sticker thing, so that when you go to pick out a washer dryer or a microwave, you can look at the ratings and say, okay, this has tactile display, it has voice command, it has whatever, and it'll get a rating and a score based on the how well it is an accessible thing. So it sounds like that's the same kind of thing. This
conceptually, yes, it's very much identical to that, right? It's declaring what you can and can't do.
Sure.
I mean, folks that know me and, I've been around a long time will know that I'm a real standards wonk, right? I'm really pedantic about standards. One of the big problems we have with the WCAG 2.x is that the conformance statements today, it's either you 100% pass or you fail, right? Like 99% is not acceptable in the W3C conformance model. The EPUB standard is trying to sort of, I don't want to say sidestep that, but they're trying to address the pragmatic reality of there's no such thing as perfect, right? And so they instead talk about accessibility support, that sort of functional level support as part of the metadata as well, so that there's no claims of perfection, but this book has been optimized, say, to work for screen reader users or optimized for people that have mobility challenges, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I think WCAG 3, I think that's part of what they're trying to do in the to yet to be released version of WCAG. I know that Jennison just Jennison Asuncion had posted on LinkedIn earlier today that they've approved the WCAG 2.2 draft and that it's coming out. But WCAG 3, which is still way in the hopper and still way a ways away, is trying to address that. The idea that there's more than pass fail. And when Chad and I teach, this is one of the things that we teach, that some accessibility is better than no accessibility. And I would much rather have a great user experience than pass a WCAG checker, right? Because, go ahead.
I absolutely agree. And I'm not a huge fan of VPATs because I think they've been abused. But
Right.
one of the things about VPAT that I do like is this notion of partially supports, right? So you could have a website, or you could have an EPUB book that has 100 images. And if 99 of those images have good, robust alt text and one image doesn't, according to WCAG 2.x, you fail SC 1.1.1 because it's an all or nothing thing. Whereas in the VPAT format, you can say partially supports, and then in the notes column say 99 images have good alt text, one image doesn't. And it's a truthful representation of how good the accessibility is, as opposed to a blanket good, bad, right? I mean, that binary black and white is just not realistic in a practical sense.
Well, and what's interesting is that, we talk about alt text, it's either present or not present. That's the pass fail. But I've had plenty of documents where it passes, everything has alt text. And then I go read the alt text for a bar chart and it says bar chart of sales for 2016. And you're like, okay, what does that tell me? Right. I mean, Christine, have you had instances where you've had that kind of thing?
Yes, we were going through some EPUBs and it's and it says alt text image. I was like, what is that?
Yeah.
So yes, for sure. And I think too, like, so if you're reading and you get this EPUB and you have a bad alt text, how are you going to really remediate that too, or how are you really going to check for it, right?
Well, I think the thing
it's in this field already,
right?
So you're waiting for that feedback, right?
Right, and I think the biggest thing is that the point we're trying to drive home here, guys, is that for our audience is that passing a checker is a great start. But making sure you understand the user experience is what is really important. In fact, Chad and I at CSUN later this year are doing an entire full day document testing with NVDA. It's a pre-conference lab. And for those of you who are interested in going, this lab is going to be amazing. You're really going to get a great user, feel comfortable about understanding the user experience for people using screen readers, because I really feel like the remediation is one thing. We check boxes and make sure things comply. And like John said, 1.1.1, text alternatives, those those are important, but the quality of what they are is so key. And Chad and I have an online class. Matter of fact, I think we need to schedule this one again because it's been well received. It's the secrets of writing effective alt text. And we spend 3 hours. And it's really just scratching the surface, but 3 hours of how do you write effective alt text? Because so many people, they get to those bar charts and line graphs or an image of a person walking a dog and have no idea what's the important thing or how to evaluate that document for that image to write that effective alt text.
So
we had...
Go ahead, Christine.
Sorry, John. we had at Accessing Higher Ground, we had an interactive exercise of writing quality alt text, right? And we came up with 4 or 5 examples of different, websites with alt text, and there was one that had like 6 boxes of different banners, and the alt text was banner 1, banner 2. And so what we did was we threw it to the audience to see, what it meant to write quality alt text. And we looked at the accessibility tree and all that, and how to determine. But absolutely right. I think people who write image, or we're in this whole thing about decorative images, right? What it should really be, and all that stuff. So I think there are plenty of lessons to be learned.
Well, it's interesting. We talk about decorative images. We were talking to someone at Accessing Higher Ground, in fact, at dinner, and they were saying that, well, why are you putting decorative in the alt text for an image? And they said, it's decorative. I don't want to hear it. If it's decorative, I don't want to know it exists. But the problem is, if you give someone a native Word document, there was no way for them to know the image is decorative unless they were to actually navigate to the checkbox that says decorative. And then it's going to say decorative, checkbox checked. So writing decorative in the alt text for a live Word doc is your only way when someone gets to that image to know that it is decorative. But of course, it's a fallacy, because then now the person is like, decorative, listening to more text, decorative, listening to more text, decorative. And you're like, why am I hearing decorative? So, it goes back to one person's solution could be another person's, accessibility challenge. And that's the struggle we have, because it's not always, a cut and dry solution. John?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is that I've also learned over the years that, we have to be careful of lumping all non-sighted users into like, this is what non-sighted users need, right? I mean, it's been my experience that people that were been blind from birth, their expectations for alt text is different than those who have lost their sight later in life, who already have what I call a robust sort of mental library of imagery, right? Mm-hmm. A person who has never seen a sunset could care less that's a glorious collection of shades of orange and purple, whereas a person who lost their sight later in life, they could that kind of descriptive alt text would resonate. It would evoke the emotional intention of the image of the sunset, right? So, the needs of individual users is going to change. One of the things that I wanted to also mention about EPUB, because it kind of correlates to something else that's been very close to my heart for many, many years, is that EPUB still supports the notion of a longer description for images. It's not necessarily using the long desk attribute, which I'm linked to in history, but there is a mechanism in place inside of EPUB books where you can actually furnish longer textual descriptions as part of the packaged book.
I have a question about that. So in PDF, alt text is not rewind. You can't step through alt text. It's like a slide. If you write long alt text and you miss something in the middle, you can't reverse back just a few lines and hear what's going on. In an EPUB environment, is that still the same thing where it's kind of start to finish? And if you want to hear it again or review, you have to just load it again and run it?
So no, not really, but I will put a slight caveat on that. So that interpage navigation to be able to go back and forward to skip through images and stuff like that, that usually tends to be a function of the screen reader. And because EPUB is based on XHTML, and a lot of people today are actually consuming EPUBs in a web browser, as opposed to a standalone EPUB reader, and even the standalone EPUB readers are using kind of browser technology under the hood, headless browsers and whatnot to render the content, because again, it's written in XHTML. And so that's actually one of the advantages of an EPUB over PDF or something is that you have a lot more granularity in being able to navigate. You can, for example, navigate using heading levels in a EPUB book, right? In the same way that we'd navigate H1, H2, H3, because the EPUB books have H1s, H2s, and H3s. So,
Right.
in NVDA, you can do HHH and start jumping through all of the headings in the EPUB book. So that's one of the real advantages, is it's really leveraging the strengths of what we get from HTML today.
Right, but in a PDF you can do the same thing too. I guess my question, just to make sure I understand, because I'm not an EPUB guy. So the definitive answer is, in an EPUB, if I get to a graphic and I start to hear a very long alt text, a long description, and I miss what they said, or I want to go back and listen to that what did they just say? Do I have to reload that image again, go back to that graphic, or can I just go previous sentence or previous line?
Sure.
With
the up arrow key on your keyboard.
So that'll cycle through the alt text itself and not force you to pop out of an image and then go back and reload.
It's going to process the quote unquote page the same way it would process a web page.
Okay, so then in fact it will. There's not a better experience when it comes to that. You're still going to have to hear the alt text. If you miss something, you got to go back out of it and back into it to hear the alt text again. I wish they would fix that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that, again, if you think about the intention of an EPUB book, it's the intention, because it's a book, it's intended to be consumed in a linear fashion, right? I mean, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, etc. And so as it's parsing the content, as your virtual cursor is going through the content, if you process some information and you want to reprocess it, you have to go back. I mean, that's just a logical way. I can't.
Well, I would love to be able to enter an image. You hear the word graphic, right? I mean, that's the typical experience now. You get to the image, it says graphic, and then it starts reading the alt text. And about every 15th or 20th word, depending on which screen reader you use, screen reader you're using, you'll hear graphic again to let you know you're still inside the alt text. And then at some point you'll get to the end and you'll hear graphic, and you'll hear the end and move on. What I'd love is for there to be some kind of beep or something to kind of get you into the environment of the image, the image's alt text. And then if they wrote 2 paragraphs about the image, I'd love to be able to step through those sentences at my own, whether I want to go back a sentence or forward a sentence or whatever, at my own leisure, rather than the only thing I can do is kind of reload it as one big chunk all again and listen to it.
Sure. And I mean, part of that is also an editorial consideration.
Yep.
And so again, as I said, I mean, one of the things that I really like about the EPUB format is that it's an implied and well-supported mechanism of providing longer textual descriptions. So it kind of bypasses this alt text of 752 characters because it's trying to describe your pie chart or whatnot, because then having an alt text of pie chart sales for 2022, and then a link that actually takes you to the extended explanation where you get all that information, actually sort of solves that problem, because at that point it's all text. You're processing it as HTML or XHTML text, right? So So that's one of the advantages, right?
Sure. Now, you guys have a tool. I was looking at the website, right? And you have a tool now it's in beta, right? You're in beta right now for an EPUB testing tool. Is that correct, Christine?
Yes, it's pre-beta. We're still working on it. Hopefully in the next year, some few months here. But we are planning for anyone really, an independent author or a larger organization or a publishing house can upload their own EPUB for free to automatically validate it against EPUB Check and ACE. So ACE is like, from Daisy to check if you're all of you've met the WCAG criteria minimum, and then also the best practices. And then it will allow you to read. It'll have a reader in it, so you can see your EPUB live and what have you. And then you should be able to also create or edit your alt text live.
Oh, that's great.
And then also, it's also it's an educational tool too. Like, so obviously ACE, by Daisy is free. Anybody can just go and do it. But what do these what do these errors really mean? And so the tool is intended to sort of teach you how to make your EPUB accessible. And there'll be a slew of other things in there, but then you'll also be able to then save it and download it back out. So up until a certain point, you'll have free services in that tool. And then if you need additional help, we're there for that. But so the hope is to just give back, obviously work together as partners in the community, the accessibility community.
Well, and we've been talking a lot about alt text, and it says here on your website that you have contextual alt text services.
So again, Dax, as you well know, because you've been doing this a fair number of years as well, creating good alt text it's as much alchemy as it is science, right? I mean, there's a little bit of, and so it's something that as an accessibility advocate and someone who's been working in digital accessibility for many years, it's a point that I'm very well attuned to. And so we have both a service, so we have trained people that understand how to write good contextually accurate alt text. Contextually accurate being the key phrase, right? Alt text is always created in context. So we can assist people. A lot of book publishers, oftentimes EPUB books sort of come from, the book was originally intended to be created as a print book, right? I mean, one of our major clients is a academic publishing company that produces textbooks, right? And you can still buy the physical Dead Tree textbook at the bookstore, but academia is moving towards digital textbooks as well, and so the conversion of print books into EPUB is a lot of what we do for our clients. But when those print books were created, the idea of a text alternative for the picture on page 17 was never really counted for. So
it's all got to be done again.
And so the publishers struggle with that. And as Christine noted, we see examples of the publishers going, oh, picture, alt equals picture, alt equals image, right? So we have people that are trained to write better alt text in context. But one of the things that Christine mentioned, and so this tool that we're working on, and it's still kind of, it's not ready for prime time yet. We actually had to, we took a bit of a pause and we started to refactor a couple of ideas. So we're not as advanced as we'd hoped to be at this point in time, but we took the decision to get it right rather than to continue working in a bad stream, right? So we backed up a little bit.
And that's a great thing to actually note. There's so many times people will just continue going because, well, I'm already moving, I might as well just go. And then they release something and you're like, wow, this really isn't a very useful tool. So we applaud you for taking a moment to take a step back and do that. In fact, I create, so I work in InDesign a lot. And so accessibility is a big deal for me. And my time is really important as well. And so actually, I created a website called accessibilityscripts.com. And on there, I have an alt text automator. So I got so tired of copying and pasting alt text back and forward and getting things, Excel files from clients. And so I worked with a script writer, a really great guy, and said, hey, can we automate some of this? And so what we ended up coming up with is that the alt text extractor, you run this script, it will go in and create a CSV file of anything that's in your links panel and pop any alt text into the next column. So you get a list of all the images or links and linked assets and then alt text if it exists. Then you can take that document, give it to writers or whoever that you want, and they can fill in the alt text or put the word artifact in there. And then you run the automator, and literally in 1 second, I did a test of 580 images on a document. It took 8 seconds for it to process all the alt text. And I was able to put it all back in one shot and artifact all the images. It was great.
That sounds really, really cool. And for a production workflow, I think that's a really awesome feature. One of the things that we're also looking to address, and again, I mean, we're not here to sell things, although, I mean, we're always here to sell things, right? But one of the other features that I'm really concerned on, because I've been looking at the accessibility of all of these EPUB books, is there are 3 areas where there's frequent concern, remediation required, right? The most important one is the quality of the alt text, right? And it's not just that alt text is there or not there, but it's the quality of the alt text, right? Image isn't good enough. And we mentioned that, part of the key to good alt text is understanding how the image is being used in context.
Yep.
And so one of the features that we're looking at for EPUB tools is that you'll be able to sort of essentially go through the book page by page, and when you get to an image, you'll be able to put focus on the image, and a modal dialog will pop up that will basically give you an overview of the image, the file name, and whatnot, and it'll expose the alt text. And the plan for the tool is that it'll be an editable interface, and so if the alt text says image, you'll be able to say no, and wipe out image, provide the sufficient alt text, save that, and we'll be storing all of that in a database, so that once you've gone through the book and you've reviewed all of the images and you've done that manual sort of remediation at an image by image level, you'll be able to hit an export button and get back an improved and remediated EPUB book, where the alt text for all of those images has been manually reviewed by a human being for contextual accuracy.
That's great.
I'm really excited about the idea of being able to edit the alt text in context. You will see the image in the context of all the other words around it and how it's being used, which is really critical to get that nuanced sort of accuracy of the text alternative. It will also allow you to create that link and provide the longer textual description. The way the standard's going now is that when you have that longer textual description, the standard says that the link to that description must be visible to all users, right? So unlike long desc, the attribute, which was discovery was a problem, this will be kind of almost like using the details and summary kind of feature in web pages.
Sure.
Not the same, but conceptually sort of the same idea.
Well, we always tell people the best way to create documents is to use the body copy to write the story. Alt text is there really to just give the description of the image, but I can write very fluid and descriptive body text that supports my bar chart or line graph, or even just an image that has meaning, and talk about it in context and be able to give those long descriptions well beyond any limit. I can write as long or short as I want. And then the alt text for the image now becomes secondary. And it's not so, oh my gosh, how am I going to fit all of this context into this bar chart or line graph or infographic? We get this all the time where people will say, this infographic has 15 different balloons in it, all pointing to different things. How do I write alt text for it? And I say the best way to do that is not to. The best way is to write alt text that says the process of sales as described in the paragraph, whatever the title of the paragraph is, and use that body text then to describe the complex processes going on in that image.
One of the things I like to do, and it's interesting that you mentioned infographics, one of the things that I've long advocated for is sort of creating a prefix or whatnot for your text alternative. So in the case of an infographic, it would be alt equals open quotation marks, infographic colon, blah, 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 close quotation marks, right? And so what happens is that the screen reader will say image, infographic, and because I put the colon in there, the screen reader actually does that perceptible pause of what a colon would do in normal reading or speaking, right? When you see a colon, there's a little bit of a pause and you continue. And so it'll go image, infographic, blah, 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 right?
Right.
And so it tells the user what kind of image it is, right? Is it a bar chart? Is it an infographic? Is it a sketch? Is it a photograph? And when I worked at JP Morgan Chase, we actually started talking to the editorial team about, standardizing on some of these prefixes as being what it did, as well as that it helped make the people that were writing alt text sort of remember that succinctness is an important criterion for alt text, right? Mm-hmm. And so by giving them the mechanism to keep it succinct, it kind of forced them to think about it that way as well.
Yeah, no, actually, recently, this past December, I was part of I was a contributing author for the Urban Institute. They published a paper called "Do No Harm: Centering Accessibility and Data Visualization," and I think there were 13 of us that contributed to the article that all talked about different approaches to creating more accessible content, richer content. How do you describe complex data visualizations? What are some of the ways that you can present it? So for our listeners, if you're interested, go search Urban Institute Do No Harm Guide, and you should get a link to that. But it's definitely one of those things that's not a B, C thing. There are nuances of all of it. And Chad and I always say it all boils down to, what do I want the user experience to be? You start with that question first, because if you can't define what that is, then the path to get to the end, to the finish line, is ambiguous, and there's no way you're going to get there. So, it's definitely a thing. So, Christine, how can people get in touch with you guys if they want more information on EPUB or what's going on with you guys?
Sure. Yeah. We can just, our website is content.industries. It's, new cutting edge web URLs. Also that we can email us at hello@content.industries, and someone, Okan or myself, will get you anything that you need. And if you want to be part of the EPUB closed beta, send us an email and we'll get you in there as well. But yeah, that's how you find us. We'll be at CSUN.
Awesome.
I'll be wearing the sparkly shoes. As you know, I walk around with my sparkly shoes on.
Awesome.
And yeah, so we'll be there.
Well, and Chad and I will be there. Chad and I will be there as well. I'll be in my sparkly vest. I am always dressed to the nines.
Yep.
So you can always find us. And we're going to have a booth there for the first time ever. Chad and Dax as Chax. I worked really hard. Chad and I both worked really hard. And we recreated the tags tree. I mean, how do you blow up the PDF tags tree to an 8x10 booth? And so what we realized is that no screenshot is going to do it justice. So we had to go into Illustrator and literally recreate it in line art, this big giant tags tree. And then so Chad did that. And then I had to go in and create we use the pack checker as our kind of our standard. So I went in and recreated the pack checker interface in Illustrator. So there's these two giant images on there. So people definitely got to come by and see it.
Congratulations.
Yeah, absolutely. John, thank you so much for being here, and Christine, both of you guys, we really appreciate your insight. And if our listeners are looking for help with their InDesign EPUBs, they can definitely reach out to you guys, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that has been what we've heard from industry is people need help with going from InDesign to EPUB. They also looking to convert from EPUB 2 to EPUB 3. Again, there's this emergence requirement in the European Union, so we can certainly help them with that. We can just help them with general sort of remediation of existing EPUBs. We just did a job recently with one of our clients where they're not digital people, right? Their subject of expertise was medical, I believe. But anyway, we were able to help them get some of their books cleaned up, and we're working with them there. So the really good news is that EPUB can be made really accessible.
Awesome.
We're seeing huge uptake in the EDU vertical. I'm anticipating seeing it show up in other areas where large amounts of information is being traded. So perhaps the financial vertical is another one to be watching closely. But I've become a real huge fan of EPUB. It really, if you're good at digital accessibility, if you know WCAG, moving from web and WCAG to EPUB and the accessibility requirements there, it's an easy transition for those that are interested. There's lots of demand for expertise in the field as well. So if people are early in their sort of accessibility career and they're looking for areas to go and sort of make their mark, I would strongly suggest you look at EPUB as just a growth opportunity, because I think it's really growing these days.
Tacking on to that, we just had a recent request to take PDFs in Word and put them into an EPUB and a Mobi.
Oh, okay.
So also very interesting. And you can also get your Mobies accessible as well. So so anywhere in the line here, at the PDF, Word, XML, InDesign level to EPUB, or just if you want to get your EPUB accessible, we can just take the EPUB. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being part of the podcast today, helping me steer the ship without Chad. Again, guys, if you're looking for LinkedIn learning stuff on accessibility, watch for Chad's courses. His 5-hour class he's got now is amazing, but the one he's working on currently, recording at this minute in the LinkedIn studios down in Southern California, is going to be great. So my name is Dax Castro, and thank you so much for joining us, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.